Welcome to meeting number 55 of the House Common Standing Committee on Canadian Heritage. I'd like to acknowledge that this meeting is taking place on the unceded traditional territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe people. Pursuant to the order of reference adopted by the House on Tuesday, May the 31, 2022, the committee is resuming clause-by-clause consideration of Bill C-18, an act respecting online communications platforms that make news content available to persons in Canada. Of course, today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format pursuant to the House of Commons Order Thursday, June the 23rd. A few comments for the benefit of the witnesses and members. Please wait until I recognize you by name before speaking. For those participating on video, there's a little icon at the bottom to activate your mic, and please mute yourself when you're not speaking. An interpretation for those on Zoom, you have the choice at the bottom of your screen.
Dr. Fry, I'm sorry,
yes?
Ms. Gladue has raised a point of order.
Yes, there's a problem with the audio. I don't know if anybody else is having this problem, but it's very hard to hear. So perhaps we could turn the volume up, Chair. Thank you.
Do you need me to start over again, Marilyn, or you heard me?
No, Chair. Thank you so much. That's whatever they've done to adjust has fixed the problem. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Great, thank you. So again, for those who are on virtual, you know how to get the interpretation, that little globe thing at the bottom. Again, all comments should be addressed to the chair. And in accordance with our routine motion, I'm informing the committee that all witnesses are present. Therefore, no connection tests in advance of the meeting were required. I want to welcome the witnesses who are present to answer any technical questions about Bill C-18 that the members of the committee might have. So we're starting. We have the Department of Canadian Heritage here. That's Thomas Owen Ripley, Assistant Deputy Minister of Cultural Affairs, Michael Sabga, Director General, Broadcasting, Copyright and Creative Marketplace Branch, Joël Paré, Acting Director, Marketplace and Legislative Policy, and Frederick Mettern, Manager, Marketplace and Legislative Policy. So now we're going to begin. If you recall, at the last meeting, we had passed three amendments. One was not carried and two others were carried. So we're now on CPC 2. And so we shall begin with CPC 2.
Point of order,
yes.
Madam Chair? Did CP... No, never mind. Sorry.
No, we didn't vote on it, I don't think.
Dr.
Sorry.
Fry, I have
yes.
Mrs. Thomas's hand up in the room.
Yes, Mrs. Thomas.
Thank you. I did have a question for the officials. I see that Mr. Ripley isn't here, so I'm sorry. I'm not sure where to point the question to. Perhaps one of the three that are here are able to answer. My question is this: I'm wondering if the bill in its current state would allow for hyperlinks to be compensated for when copyright content is not present. So if the links are not accompanied with an image or text from an article, so it's just the copyright, or sorry, just the link, it's just the link, can that be compensated for under this current legislation?
Merci pour la question, Madame Thomas.
Thank you for the question, Mrs. Thomas. The bill stipulates that major platforms...
Sorry, I don't have interpretation.
Oh, you're on the floor.
I don't have any volume.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you, folks. Thank you.
Merci. Okay. Donc, le projet de...
Thank you. So the bill stipulates that platforms must negotiate regarding all of the ways that news is made available. So if an undertaking only used hyperlinks, yes, there could be negotiation that would only respect hyperlinks. Thank you.
Chair, may I ask a follow-up question?
Of course.
Thank you. So I guess then currently under copyright law, there is a certain amount of text that can be taken from a source and shared or made public. For example, professors in a university can copy part of a textbook and share it with their students if it's within a certain percentage. Here within Parliament, we often do this, where we might want to take from a source and share a paragraph or a sentence or two. And under copyright laws, we're permitted to do that. So I'm wondering then, under this legislation, are those copyright provisions that are currently made, are those kept intact by this legislation, or is this creating a different set of rules for DNIs?
Thank you for the question, Ms. Thomas. So this regime does not create any new copyright and is complementary to the existing copyright framework. So the limitations and exceptions that are available in the copyright regime still applies, and nothing in this bill restricts the limitations and exceptions that are existent under copyright. So what we're talking about here, if we're talking about hyperlinks specifically, there are decisions that show that hyperlinks are not protected by copyright under current law. But since this regime is not about copyright protection specifically, those two regimes can coexist, right? So the limitations and exceptions that are under the copyright regime can continue to apply. And this is the bargaining framework that exists in complementarity with the copyright framework.
Dr. Fry, Ms. Gladue has her hand up.
Marilyn?
Thank you, Chair. So I think I heard you say that hyperlinks could be compensated then. Does that go against the 2011 Supreme Court decision that said hyperlinks couldn't be monetized?
Well, again, the Supreme Court decision was in relation to copyright, and so and this is a different matter. Thank you.
Mrs. Thomas has her hand up. Dr. Fry?
Yes, Mrs. Thomas.
So I guess just for further clarification then, like actions such as sharing a headline or a certain portion of text, a snippet, a quote, a short summary, a hyperlink, like these types of things are currently permissible under copyright law here in Canada. And so they don't require compensation. Whereas, of course, if you exceed that allotment, then compensation is required. You need to pay for that source material. So this bill then would seem to change it. It would intend to require platforms to compensate news organizations for actions that are legally permissible under copyright law. And so is that not correct? That this bill would be requiring compensation for something that is currently legal under our copyright framework?
Thank you. The requirement on platforms is to bargain with news outlets, right? That's the obligation that's being put on platforms here. And it's a requirement to bargain on the whole scope of the ways in which news are being made available by platforms. So that includes, yes, snippets and hyperlinks and other ways, and pictures and different ways for platforms to make that content available to users. But there is nothing in the bill that requires specifically compensation for a hyperlink or a pay-per-click type of scheme.
I understand that there's nothing in the bill that requires compensation for these things, but at the same time, the use of links and compensation for links is not excluded from this legislation, correct?
Correct. It's one of the ways. It's one of the ways in which platforms may make available news content, and so hyperlinks are part of the scope of the ways in which, again, platforms make news content available to their users. So then they are part of the scope of the bargaining process.
Right. Thank you for helping bring some further clarification to that. I think you're outlining why we feel it's so important to amend this. Interestingly enough, the other day, my colleague across the way made a comment with regards to Spain. I have since done a little bit of research on that in terms of their legislation, and originally they actually would admit that they made a mistake with their legislation, and they had to go back and fix it. My colleague forgot to mention that part. So in fixing it, they actually went back and had to make a change with regards to hyperlinks and making sure that they alone were not reason for compensation. And that is consistent with other European legislation as well. And so the reason for the amendment on the table then today from first CPC 2 is to also be consistent with those other entities who learned from their mistakes, and I think we can do likewise, and I think get this right the first time. And so I think the amendment on the table then would be that we don't include hyperlink as a way of, or as something that can be expected to be compensated for. So it would be excluded from the scope of bargaining, which means then that, of course, copyrighted material would still be permitted within that framework of bargaining. But it would bring us into consistency, I guess, greater consistency with, like I said, Spain and the EU, but also it would also make sure that we're in line with the Supreme Court decision from 2011 that says that links do not have monetary value in and of themselves. And so for those reasons, we would be wishing to move the amendment, which is CPC 2.
All right. So my question to the room, to committee is, shall CPC 2 carry? Those opposed?
Yes, there are those opposed in the room, Dr. Fry.
Yes. Can you then do a call, Clerk?
Absolutely. Mr. Biddle. Opposed. Mr. Coteau. Mr. Coteau?
Oh, sorry, I had some trouble getting my mic back.
Thank you, sir. Ms. Hefner? Opposed. Mr. Housefather?
Opposed.
Mr. Lewis?
Against.
Ms. Gladue?
In favor.
Mr. Shields?
In favor.
Mrs. Thomas?
In favor.
Mr. Waugh?
In favor.
Mr. Champoux?
Contre.
Mr. Julian?
Contre.
6, 7 nays, 4 yeas.
Thank you, Chair. Clerk, that means, however, that because CPC 2 did not carry, then we can move to NDP 2. Is that right? And that is Mr. Julian.
Thank you, Madam Chair. If you're recognizing me,
I am. If you wish, you don't have to speak, Mr. Julian, but if you wish to, you can.
Oh, Madam Chair, I never give up an opportunity to speak.
Okay, Mr.
But I won't speak for 16 hours, which is what I did to one of the amendments in the softwood lumber sellout. I will keep my remarks brief. We had a number of witnesses, including APTN and Dedan Sevenevut, that indicated the importance of this measure. This amendment broadens the scope of the definition for news content to recognize that Indigenous storytelling as a traditional means by which Indigenous news outlets may communicate news stories to Indigenous communities. The amendment ensures that the Act recognizes the particular cultural approach of Indigenous peoples to news and information content, which could encompass storytelling techniques. Now, Madam Chair, you'll recall last Friday we adopted NDP 1, which provided for a definition in the bill itself. What this does, really, the two amendments, NDP 1 and NDP 2, should be really seen as working together to ensure that Indigenous peoples are recognized by C18 and that there is potential for negotiation for Indigenous news outlets. So hopefully, given that we adopted NDP 1, that we will adopt the second part of that that tandem, which is NDP 2. So I move that amendment.
Thank you. And I ask the committee, shall NDP 2 carry? Yes, yes.
Ms. Gladdy's hand up on the floor.
Yes, Marilyn.
Thank you, Chair. I absolutely support, the addition of Indigenous content into this bill. I just have two questions. Is there a definition for what is Indigenous storytelling? That's question one. And the second question is, does it include, like, if, let's say, an elder that meets the criteria of having one journalist or, meets the definition of who's included in the bill, if they do Facebook Live or broadcasts like that, is that able to be monetized, would be my question. I guess those questions would be for Mr. Julian, because he brought the amendment.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll refer to the officials on this. As Madame Gladu is aware, the scope around traditional Indigenous storytelling is something that is very well known. And this fits within the framework of the bill, and that's why the amendment works with the definitions that we adopted last Friday. But I'll refer to the officials who've been I think, very eloquent in this regard.
I don't know who is going to answer. Mr. Saba?
Thank you, Chair. It's Mr. Ripley. Apologies for...
Welcome, Mr. Ripley.
Thank you. Apologies for being late this morning. Thank you for the question. There is no definition of Indigenous storytelling that I understand is being proposed. It's a recognition that Indigenous communities have a different way of sometimes communicating or sharing information, and so the way that this would be understood, presumably, is in discussions between the CRTC and Indigenous communities and understanding the scope of how they see storytelling. With respect to your second question, MP Gladu, to the extent that eligible news business was making content available through something like Facebook Live, yes, it could be part of the bargaining.
Dr. Fry?
Thank you. Did that answer your question, Ms. Gadu?
Yes, thank you, Chair.
Mrs. Thomas.
All right. Someone else got their hand up?
Yep, it would be Amy, the clerk. Dr. Fry.
Okay.
Mrs. Thomas has her hand up.
Sorry, Mrs. Thomas.
Thank you, Chair. I just was hoping for further elaboration just on the last point that you made, Mr. Ripley, with regards to like Facebook or YouTube. If stories were posted, that I'm just wanting to ensure that I understand you correctly, that could then be captured under this legislation.
Chair, if I may. There's a series of steps that you would have to work through. So the first one is, whether the platform is a digital news intermediary and is designated under the Act pursuant to the criteria at Section 6. And then, as the conversation you were having with my colleague earlier, making available news content includes, in the audiovisual format, and so yes, it could include that type of activity.
Thank you. Anyone else hand up? Amy?
Mrs.
No.
Thomas has her hand up.
All right, so I will call the question then.
Madame la Présidente,
Madam Chair, point of order, Madam Chair. This is Martin.
Yes, Martin.
Madame la Présidente, juste.
Madam Chair, I just have a technical question. The interpreters are indicating that sound quality is just passable when you are speaking. Would you be able to bring the microphone closer to your nose, please?
All right. Okay, is that better?
On fait signe que oui.
I'm being told yes.
Good, thank you.
Dr. Fry,
all right.
as well, we have Mrs. Thomas with her hand up in the room.
Mrs. Thomas.
Thank you. Sure. So I understand the need to define the digital news intermediary. I guess I'm also just curious as to I guess I'm also just curious as to how how this legislation defines the eligible news business. If this is an individual, let's say an elder who is highly respected or someone within the Indigenous community who is sharing a story, whether that was intended for that digital audience or perhaps was intended for a live audience, but then someone captured it and then posted it. Regardless, perhaps it seems obvious to me that if it's within the framework of a news business, it fits. But if it was an individual who wasn't functioning from within a news business, I'm wondering whether or not that would be held then, how that would be treated, I guess, if that were to be shared within a platform.
Thank you for the question, MP Thomas. So right now, on the basis of how the Act is crafted, no, it could not be a single individual. The eligibility criteria in Section 27 are derived from the key elements of the definition of qualified Canadian journalism organization under the Income Tax Act, and right now it requires two journalists or more. I believe there's a number of amendments on the table that the committee will look at when we get to that point in clause by clause. So I understand that's a point of debate. My understanding of Mr. Julian and what he's seeking to accomplish is, so the previous amendment that he tabled and that was adopted by the committee, it created a definition for an indigenous I don't want to misspeak here, news outlet. And recognize that news outlet would have to be controlled and operated by an Indigenous person or entity. And my understanding of what he's seeking to do with this amendment is simply recognize in the definition of news content that it includes storytelling. But right now, the bargaining would still have to be between, say, an Indigenous news outlet producing news content, which would include Indigenous storytelling, and a platform. Not, again, as the bill currently stands, not a question of one individual being able to bargain in that way.
Good job.
Thank you. Chair, I believe you're on mute.
Sorry, clerk, is there anyone else with their hand up in the room?
No, Dr. Fry.
Shall we then move to voting? Shall NDP 2 carry?
Yes. I'm hearing yeses in the room.
Yeses. Is there anyone opposed? No. Then NDP 2 will carry. And then I'm going to ask, shall clause 2 carry?
As amended, Madam Chair.
Yes, as amended. Shall clause 2 carry as amended?
I'm seeing yeses.
There
is a request for a recorded vote on the floor.
All right. Shall we go to the recorded vote, please, clerk?
Mr. Biddle. Mr. Coteau.
Support.
Ms. Hefner. Mr. Housefather.
Yes.
Mr. Lewis.
In favor.
Ms. Gladue.
No.
Mr. Shields.
No.
Mrs. Thomas.
No.
Mr. Watt.
No.
Mr. Champoux.
Oui.
Mr. Julian.
Ben oui.
7 yeas, 4 nays.
So clause 2 is carried. We shall now move to clause 3 and to CPC 3. Now, everyone has CPC 3 in front of them. And so we shall, if anyone wishes to speak to it or against it, are there any hands up in the room?
I have Mrs. Thomas and Ms. Gladue.
Mrs. Thomas.
Thank you. So what this amendment does is it further clarifies the idea or the concept of journalistic independence. And so we've done our best to do that here with this amendment. The reason why we feel this is important, and we heard from a number of witnesses who also contended that this was really important, was because that there's a growing distrust from the general public towards the media. Canadians are finding it difficult to know that media sources are not being politically swayed or influenced. And so there's actually, I believe it's in the 50% range of Canadians that are reporting that they're not trusting the media because they do feel that it is tainted or that it is not acting independently because of undue influence. And so in order to ensure that there is greater credibility with regards to journalism in Canada, especially when there are dollars being infused in this way, the definition of journalistic independence then would need to be clearly defined. And so I guess I would just be curious before continuing. I would be interested in an opinion from the officials who are here with regards to whether or not there is a current definition of journalistic independence as it's used in Clause 2, line 34.
Chair, if I may, thank you for the question, Ms. Thomas. So, you know, the clause in question is an interpretive clause and was put there to clearly signal that the regime should be applied in a manner consistent with journalistic independence. There is no definition of journalistic independence provided for in the Act as currently drafted. My observation on the motion that you're moving is that it includes one element of journalistic independence. We did do some looking at how various journalism organizations would define the concept, and you know, it's the idea that it's independence from government, commercial, or other interests seeking to subvert content for their own purposes. And so my observation on the motion on the floor would be that it obviously includes an element of that, the independence from government, but journalistic independence, I think, is broader than just government.
Thank you, and I think we would be open to amending that further, because I do think you raise a good point, Mr. Ripley. I do believe that it's not only that journalists should be independent of government and able to make their own their own decisions there, but also should be independent of undue influence from large entities such as platforms like Google or Facebook, which again causes further concern with regards to this legislation and the way that it could potentially impact journalists. So I guess right now, under the current framework of this bill, there is a great deal within it that is left up to the governor and council, which ultimately, as you stated in our last meeting, comes down to a cabinet decision. And so I am concerned that then interferes with journalistic independence. Do you think that could? Do you think that there's potential for those waters to be muddied? Do you feel that government is completely removed from the process by which eligible news businesses are securing the funds from the DNIs?
Thank you for the question, Ms. Thomas. The framework as proposed was intended to keep government intervention to a minimum. There were different models that were considered, and there was a discussion earlier about the European approach, which has gone the copyright route. But one of the reasons that the model on the table was chosen was to leave it to the platforms and news businesses to engage in commercial negotiations with limited government independence, with limited government involvement. Excuse me. And so, specifically with respect to your question around eligible news outlets, that definition is twofold. So, if you are, a print news business who has QCGO status, you are deemed eligible, and then alternatively, the CRTC can look at whether you kind of meet the key elements of that definition, recognizing that, for example, broadcasters are not eligible under the Income Tax Act labor tax credit framework. There is no governor and council regulatory power with respect to those three criteria. So they're in the bill, and then it is to the CRTC to apply them. And so specifically on that question of whether there's a GIC power on the eligibility, the answer is no. But
the GIC is involved in exemptions under Clause 11. And the GIC is involved under Clause 2 with regards to the definition of DNIs. So if the governor and council is cabinet, then they would be involved in those definitions. In terms of, as you stated in our last meeting, establishing criteria that would be used with regards to determining DNIs, with regards to which then impacts the bargaining framework, as well as the exemption framework under Clause 11. Is that not correct?
There is a role for the governor and council as it relates to certain regulatory decisions. Yes, and so you are right that the governor and council would set the criteria at Section 6, which is about what platforms or digital news intermediaries are subject to the Act, and then there is a power at Section 11 for the governor and council to further elaborate on those exemption criteria. The question, though, of whether a platform, a digital news intermediary, has met those criteria falls to the CRTC to make that assessment. So it's not the governor and council who makes that assessment at the end of the day, and there's actually no power for the governor and council in terms of assessing whether a particular digital news intermediary has met that criteria or not. I believe your previous question was about kind of specifically eligibility, and there again, right now, as the bill as drafted, there is no GIC power at Section 27. It's really the criteria that are in the bill, and then there is a regulatory power for the CRTC to specify, how news businesses should apply for eligibility, et cetera. So they have a process-oriented regulatory power there.
So I do understand that that the governor and council would be responsible for setting the criteria. The CRTC would be responsible for its enactment. Again, though, based on that, it would be the government having impact with regard to who makes it and who doesn't in terms of definition or eligibility as well as exemption. My concern is that the public is not going to take the time to understand the nuances that you've walked me through here, and perception matters. And we already have a general public that is hesitant to trust the media because they feel that the government has undue influence or that large corporations have undue influence. And so, again, it seems that it would then be beneficial to the general public and I think to this place, to Parliament as well, to create further definition then around this idea of journalistic independence. Because what I'm hearing you say is that this term is not defined in this legislation. It's simply subjective and left up to each eligible news business to determine. Is that correct?
Thank you, MP Thomas. The idea behind this interpretive provision was that the concept of journalistic independence would be understood as it's understood by the news and journalism industry and sector, and so it was. Again, there is no definition of it in the bill, but the intention was that it would be understood in relation to how the news sector understands it. And I provided you with one definition, from our kind of review of various journalism organizations.
Mr. Julian can have the floor.
We have Ms. Gladue, Mr. Biddle, and Mr. Julian.
Thank you, Chair. Okay, so I do think there's something to be done here. I mean, I think Canadians want to make sure that the content that they're getting is not biased, either by the far left or the far right. And there is a bit of lack of trust. I personally, here on the Hill sometimes see what happens, and then I see what's reported in various places, and it's sometimes skewed. So I think it's a problem that there is no definition of journalistic independence, and I'm wondering, there's no measurement for it, right? So it's hard to do anything with that. But if the government decided, is there any role for government in deciding if something is misinformation or disinformation? That's really one of my concerns, is that the government will decide to filter the content that gets to the public. I think what we want is that everybody reports the news and the public decides for themselves what they think about it. So is there anything in this bill that would allow the government to exclude, or the CRTC to exclude, based on being misinformation or disinformation?
Thank you for the question, MP Gladue. So the bill. So in order to be, the question boils down to whether a news business is eligible or able to bargain under the framework. And what I would draw to your attention to there is, the criteria is that news business has to produce content that is primarily focused on matters of general interest and reports of current events, including coverage of democratic institutions. And then we have the question of kind of, two journalists and in part that's a proxy for having, an editorial function in place, right? So the question came up about a single individual, and in part, the two journalists recognizes that, part of a news business is having kind of that editorial function in place. And so there's nothing in the bill that allows the government to censor or look at questions of mis or disinformation or make that determination. The mechanism is whether a news business is in the business of covering matters of general interest and democratic institutions.
Dr. Fry, on the speaking list, we still have Mr. Biddle and Mr. Julian.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll just be very brief on this. Understand Mr. Nader's intention with this amendment. He's a very thoughtful individual, but it is redundant given that the legislation doesn't allow for political interference, as Mr. Ripley has really gone through in detail with all of the questions asked by the opposition. So there's no political interference permitted in any stage of this. It's redundant. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Dr. Fry, after Mr. Biddle, we have Mr. Julian. Mr. Waugh.
I'm muted again. Mr. Julian.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just wanted to read out the the sections and just ask you a very direct question, because I think there's been some attempt to be a bit disingenuous around this section. The freedom of expression. For greater certainty, this act is to be interpreted and applied in a manner that is consistent with freedom of expression. That's Clause 3.1. Clause 3.2, journalistic independence. This act is to be interpreted and applied in a manner that supports the journalistic independence enjoyed by news outlets in relation to news content produced primarily for the Canadian news marketplace, including local, regional, and national news content. Is there anything in those two clauses, because they strike me as crystal clear, anything that minimizes or diminishes freedom of expression or journalistic independence?
Chair, if I may, no, as you've outlined, Mr. Julian. I mean, those clauses have been included to provide clarity on how the act it should be applied in matters in a way that's consistent with Canadian values and to respect the independence of the news sector.
Thank you very much. And
sorry, Madam Chair, I just had a brief comment, because there is a wacky far right. You won't even call them media, but a infrastructure that leads to deliberate disinformation and hate, and we've seen this played out so many ways. They trigger themselves on things like compliments to CBC for actually producing outstanding broadcasting. In fact, now that I'm saying this, Madam Chair, I know that the far right wacko infrastructure will start sending social media messages. The reality is we have very strong media sector journalists who have a great deal of integrity. They have been attacked by the far right, but the reality is there's nothing in this bill that diminishes from that strong journalistic independence that we see in our country, and that is one of the hallmarks of democracy. And so if a member of this committee suggests that Canadians have lost confidence in media, when we know that Canadians support the kind of integrity that our journalists show, I would just have to completely disagree. I think there's been an attempt by the far right to make disinformation and hate a news source. It is simply not true, and our journalists perform with integrity at all times and independence at all times. We may not agree with what they write or they say, but that's the hallmark of a democracy. So I'm going to be voting against this amendment, and any suggestion that our journalists act with anything less than the complete integrity that we see from journalists in our press gallery and right across the country.
Thank you, Mr. Julian. And I
Dr.
think,
Fry?
are there
I
any
have-
other hands up?
Mr. Wall had his hand up, Dr. Fry.
Kevin.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just an observation here, if you don't mind, whether it's the wacky right or even the wacky left. I would say, as a former journalist for 4 decades, I have seen, and it's advertising and editorial. And I'll give you some examples of this, where newspapers never took a position. Now they're selling the front page of the newspaper on election day, where it'll come out, "We support bang." And it's actually a party that buys the front page of the newspaper coast to coast, where it never used to be. It was editorial and advertising, where it was that line. The line no longer exists. When I was there, advertising could never come into the newsroom. They're in the newsroom every single day now, as we've witnessed in newspapers and editorials. So I just wanted to kind of state my position, because I have seen a drastic change, not only in newspapers, but digital and, radio and TV, where the editorial now may support one particular party on that day, on the election day where you're trying to get votes out. Is that where they should go? Well, one paper, let's say the Toronto Star, will support the current government. Another paper, the Toronto Sun, will support the opposition. So I just wanted to say that, because we have seen since 2015 where you can buy the front page of a newspaper now, and parties have done that. I can show you examples from 2015 on, where the 2 front pages of the paper are bought by a party. So that's all I'm saying, is that the journalistic independence, I think, has been eroded. And around this table, you should realize it has been eroded, only because I think the advertising is now into the editorial departments. That's all I have to say.
Thank you, Kevin.
Dr. Fry?
And so, yes.
I have Ms. Gladue and Ms. Hepner.
Marilyn Gladue.
Thank you, Chair. I just felt I needed to correct the record for my NDP colleague. There's a CBC article out from March of 2021 saying Canadian trust in journalism is wavering. A recent survey found 49% of Canadians think journalists are purposely trying to mislead. And I think we've all seen examples where things have been skewed either to the far right or to the far left. Neither is good for our democracy. And because we don't have a definition of journalistic independence, I think that's what this amendment is trying to address, to make sure that we're not getting those voices that Canadians, frankly, don't want to hear, and that erode the trust that people have in the news.
Thank you, Ms. Gladue. And Lisa.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to chime in and say I think there's a lot of misunderstanding of how news works. I think if there's any lack of trust in news today, it's because there's not enough journalists. There are no journalists left. So back in the day, we always had editorials. We always had opinions in the newspaper, but we'd also have a couple hundred journalists who were in the courtrooms. They were in city halls. They were out on the streets. They were at the crime scenes. And we don't have that anymore. And that's what this bill is trying to address. It's trying to get more journalists into news organizations so we have more news and we have more good news. There's more variety. There's more opinions. There's more different people actually reporting. And when we see hundreds of news outlets have closed since 2008 in this country, and we'll see the argument that, well, a couple hundred other online news organizations have popped up in that time. What we don't see is that those news, they're not news. They're not gathering news. They are publishing opinion only. So we have a proliferation of opinion organizations out there and people publishing their opinions without people going out actually reporting the news. So I will not be supporting this amendment. I don't think it's necessary. Journalism organizations have codes of conduct that they follow. They have laws that they have to follow. They have to understand what they can do in a courtroom. they are, they have to go before the CRTC if they don't follow all the proper journalism standards. These are things that are taught in journalism schools and in newsrooms across the country. I think that's all I have to say.
Thank you, Lisa.
Dr. Fry, it's Amy the clerk. We have Mrs. Thomas and we have Mr. Champoux.
Mrs. Thomas.
Thank you. I don't disagree with what my honorable colleague across the way has said. I think the point of this amendment is simply to say, let's make sure that that public perception is. I guess let's just make sure that this that there isn't any chance of it. Which is to say, to be able to gain the trust of the public is to ensure that there are these guardrails in place or these provisions in place that ensure that the media will not be politically swayed or influenced through bias in any way. And I think, again, this report that came out in spring of 2021 highlights that 52% of Canadians agree that most news organizations are more concerned with supporting an ideology or political position than with informing the public. That's a CBC report. I think, with all due respect to my colleague, Mr. Julian, that's a far cry away from being a crazy wacko news outlet. And so I believe that it's reasonable for us around this table to consider putting a guardrail in place, which is to say, make no mistake, Canadians, we are ensuring that there will be no undue political influence or bias imposed upon you. Seems pretty reasonable.
Thank you, Mr. Champoux. Martin?
C'est bon, Madame la Présidente, je veux...
Madam Chair, if everyone is ready to go to a vote on the amendment, I would be for that.
Thank you, Martin. And clerk, is there anybody else with their hands up?
No, Madam Chair.
No, then I shall ask the question. Shall CPC 3 carry? Anyone opposed?
There seems to be a few voices both ways in the room, Dr. Fry.
All right, well then, can you please call it, please?
Mr. Biddle on CPC 3. Mr. Coteau.
Opposed?
Ms. Hefner. Mr. Housefather.
Contre.
Mr. Lewis.
Against.
Ms. Gladue.
En faveur.
Mr. Shields.
In favor.
Mrs. Thomas.
In favor.
Mr. Waugh.
In favor.
Monsieur Champoux.
Contre.
Mr. Julian.
Contre.
7 nays, 4 yeas.
Then CPC 3 does not carry. And so I'm going to ask the question, shall clause 3 carry? Anyone opposed?
There are voices on both sides, Dr. Fry.
All right, can you please call it? Thank you, clerk.
Clause 3. Mr. Biddle. Thank you. Mr. Coteau. Sorry, Mr. Coteau, you're muted.
This is the clause 3
Yes.
from the block. Is that correct?
No. Clause,
Support. Oh,
clause 3, which only contained one amendment, that was CPC 3, which we did not pass, and so we're now saying shall clause 3 unamended, and I don't need to say that, but shall clause 3 carry?
this is the CPC clause, correct?
No, this is the bill clause 3 of the bill.
Oh, clause 3. I'm supportive.
Thank you.
Ms. Hefner. Mr. Housefather.
Yes.
Mr. Lewis.
In favor.
Ms. Gladue.
No.
Mr. Shields.
No.
Mrs. Thomas.
No.
Mr. Waugh,
No.
Monsieur Champoux,
En faveur.
Monsieur Julian.
En faveur.
7 yeas, 4 nays.
Clause 3, therefore, is carried. Now, we're going to go to Clause 4, and the first amendment up is BQ1. Mr. Champoux, did you wish to speak to it?
Madame la Présidente.
Madam Chair, I've been waiting for this moment my entire life. The goal of this bill is obviously to reestablish a balance in the market, to ensure that digital news intermediaries are part of a structure and have to contribute to the health of Canadian news. And the sustainability that we're looking for the news sector and for local and independent news businesses also must go through the sustainability of Canadian news businesses. We need to also enshrine the sustainability of news businesses in Canada. So, it's sustainability, including the sustainability of news businesses in Canada, including independent local ones. This is adding some much needed detail.
Thank you. Is there any discussion on this amendment?
Mrs. Thomas has her hand up.
Mrs. Thomas.
Thank you. I just have a clarifying question to the officials, perhaps to the legislative clerk, to be clear, sorry. And that is with regards to BQ1. Can BQ1 be passed, and can the next 3 amendments still be entertained if that's the case?
Madam Chair, if I may.
Yes, sir. Yes, Mr. Miller.
If BQ1 is adopted, NDP3, PV1, and CPC4 cannot be moved due to the line conflict.
Okay. Thank you.
Chair, may I ask?
Yes.
Can I ask for a 2-minute recess, please?
Yes, certainly. I shall ask the rest of the committee for a 2-minute recess. For you specifically, or for the committee?
For the entire committee.
To suspend?
Yes, to suspend for 2 minutes, yes.
All right. Is everyone in agreement that the committee suspends for 2 minutes? I think we should do that. Thank you. Committee suspended.
we have a solution that I think is a very elegant one for this situation.
Anthony had his hand up earlier. I would like to hear him and then you. Thank you. Anthony?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm not being in the room, I may be missing out on the fun of discussing how to amend, but I think this would be handled by adding in block 1 the words in both the nonprofit and for-profit sectors after the word Canada in the second line of the amendment. And I think that would resolve adding in what is missing from BQ1 and that is in NDP3. And if it is okay with Mr. Julian and Mr. Champoux, I would propose to amend BQ1 by adding after Canada in both the nonprofit and for-profit sectors, and then it would continue including independent local ones.
Thank you. So we shall discuss, well, but Peter, before I go to you, we should discuss Anthony's motion. Any discussion?
Yes, I have Monsieur Champoux and I have Madame Gladue.
All right, Martin.
Mr. Julian, sorry.
Merci, Madame.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, I think that would be completely reasonable, and that is the result of the discussion we had here in the room a few minutes ago. That's the conclusion we reached, and I think all the parties here agree with this proposed sub-amendment.
It would sound to me, Mr. Champoux, that great minds think alike whether they're in the room or not. So now we're going to... Peter, did you want to say anything?
Just it's a little freaky that Mr. Housefather read our minds like that remotely.
Okay.
But yes, this is absolutely the way to go, a sub-amendment to the BQ amendment.
Thank you. He has the uncanny habit of being able to do that. So now
there was Ms. Gladue as well, Dr. Fry. Ms. Gladue had her hand
sorry.
up
I thought you had said not Ms. Gladue, but Mr. Champoux. Sorry.
No problem. Thank you, Chair. I just want to say, we very much support adding the not-for-profits in here. We heard clearly from community radio stations across the country and Indigenous radio stations that they felt they were going to be excluded otherwise. So I very much support the amendment. Thanks to the team for working together on that.
Thank you. So now what we have is an amendment which says that after news businesses in Canada, it's going to read in both the non-profit and for-profit sectors, and then continuing, including independent local ones. So is there any opposition to this amendment?
Madam Chair, if I may.
Yes, Mr. Miller.
I think Mr. Julian had the same idea, but we should probably vote on the sub-amendment first and then the amendment as amended after.
Yes, that is what I'm going to do right now, Mr. Miller. I'm going to vote on it. But I'm asking if there's anybody opposed, then we don't need to call a vote. We just know that it's unanimous, and then we can move to the amended motion. Is anyone in the room opposed to this
seeing any opposition,
amendment?
Dr. Fry.
Pardon?
I'm not seeing any opposition, Dr.
All
Fry.
right, so that I think with hearing no opposition, obviously that amendment carries, sub-amendment carries, and then I'm going to ask you to vote on the motion as amended. Do you need me to read it again, or do you all know what it says? No need to read it? Thank you.
We're good.
So good. So we're going to ask, I'm going to call the question on the motion, on the amendment as amended. Any objection?
Not seeing any objection in the room, Dr. Fry.
Then I think this passes unanimously. Thank you. Now, if BC, as we know, that if BQ1 carries, then NDP3, PV1, and CPC4 cannot be moved. So we shall move past those. And then I shall ask, shall clause 4 carry as amended? Any
there
opposition?
are voices on both sides in the room, Dr. Fry.
All right, so let's call it.
On clause 4, Mr. Biddle.
In favor.
Mr. Coteau. I'm sorry, sir, you actually weren't on mute. Could you unmute yourself and vote? Thank you. Thank you.
In favor?
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Mr. Housefather.
In favor?
Mr. Lewis.
In favor.
Ms. Gladue.
In favor.
Mr. Shields.
In favor.
Mrs. Thomas.
Abstain.
Mr. Watt.
In favor.
Mr. Champoux.
En faveur.
Mr. Julian.
En faveur.
Yes.
10 yeas.
Clause 4 is carried. Now, shall clause 5 carry? Any opposition? Clause 5 carries. Clause 6, CPC 5.
I'm
and
sorry.
so,
There's a.
yes?
I'm terribly
Yes.
sorry. I was noting something down. Mrs. Thomas had her hand up on clause 5.
All right. As you know, clause 5 has not been amended, or there have been no amendments proposed. Yes, Ms. Thomas.
Sorry, it just, with regards to clause 5, my hand was up and it wasn't acknowledged concerning whether or not that passes.
And we would say no.
I think.
And we would say no, Chair.
I beg your pardon?
My hand was up with regards to clause 5, and
Yes.
it wasn't acknowledged.
All right. I can't see your hand from here, so I didn't know your hand was up. Now, so what, you're voting against? All Conservatives are voting against?
I would suggest perhaps we take a roll call.
All right, let's go back with the roll call for clause 5.
Clause 5, Mr. Biddle.
In favor.
Mr. Coteau.
In favor.
Ms. Hefner.
In favor.
Mr. Housefather.
In favor.
Mr. Lewis.
In favor.
Ms. Gladue.
Opposed.
Mr. Shields.
Opposed?
Mrs. Thomas.
Opposed.
Mr. Waugh.
Oppose.
Mr. Champoux.
En faveur.
Mr. Julian.
En faveur.
7 yeas, 4 nays.
So clause 5 carries. Now, we should move to clause 6, CPC 5. Ms. Thomas. Did you wish to speak to CPC 5?
Yes, Dr. Fry, she does.
Yes, go ahead, Ms. Thomas.
Thank you, Chair. So with regards to CPC 5, essentially what we have observed with this piece of legislation is that the definition of a DNI is not clear and that it is left up to a number of subjective criteria. It therefore creates a fair bit of, I guess, a lack of clarity. And because DNIs have a responsibility to report themselves or submit themselves to this legislation, allow their names to be put on a list, and if they fail to do so, they could face penalties. And so it seems then that it would be best, in order to serve Canadians well, it would be best then to clearly define what a DNI is, and to make those criteria more black and white or clear. And so that is the attempt here. It's an imperfect attempt, but it's an attempt nevertheless to be very clear in terms of what falls within the jurisdiction of this legislation. And so we've attempted to do that by offering a monetary amount. So by saying that it would apply to an intermediary that generates at least $100 million per year in advertising, subscription, usage, or membership revenue in Canada. That $1 million per year in in advertising subscription usage or membership revenue is important because it ensures, again, that it's going after these large entities, which it's my understanding from the minister speaking to this bill that that's what he wishes to do, is go after, and let's be clear here, they're foreign players who are acting as these DNIs, and so the goal is to have them enter into negotiations with eligible news businesses in order to see compensation for news. And so let's ensure that it is in fact those entities that are held accountable, and that other smaller entities and potentially user-generated content is not caught in this bill, and that there is no potential, for that to be the case. And so that's why we've brought this monetary amount forward. I guess I would just note that some of the testimony that we received during our time earlier meetings, during some of those meetings, it was brought to our attention that the way that the legislation is currently worded and the criteria that have been set out, because they are so broad, it really could include anyone with a website that posts links to news outlets on it. And so again, we're just wanting to prevent that and make sure that there's no chance of capturing user-generated content. We're watching that play out in Bill C-11 right now in the Senate, where user-generated content is captured by that bill, and it will be to the demise of many digital-first creators. We don't want this bill to cause that type of damage. And so we want to ensure that it hits its target, that it fulfills its stated intent. And we believe that one of the best ways to ensure that that is in fact the case is to make sure that definitions are very clear, that there's not this gray area, I guess, in terms of the definition of a DNI. And so, again, feeling that that perhaps a monetary amount is one of the best ways to ensure that this bill really does remain aimed at big tech rather than individuals or smaller entities with websites that post links to news, i.e. blogs, for example, or even the, well, I'll leave it there.
Thank you, Ms. Thomas. I
have a speaking list, Dr. Fry, of Ms. Gladue, Mr. Biddle, and Mr. Housefather.
And I think, I don't know, Michael, there's a little white hand above your head. Is that your hand up? It's a funny little white hand there, like a glove. No? Over your left hand, right behind you, kind of, right over your eyebrow. It's moved.
No, the only thing here are two black hands, Chair.
Okay, there's a very bright white hand. I'm sorry. Marilyn.
Thank you, Chair. So I think I like this amendment because I think it's true that the minister really, we're trying to make sure that there's funding for local and small media organizations across the country. And I think it was clear that they want Facebook, Meta, and Google to do that. And I've said on multiple occasions that they're willing to give the money. We should just have them put it into a fund and have, a council of small media organizations figure out how to divide that up to keep the best outcome. And then there's no bureaucracy of this whole bill. However, that said, I think if we put some kind of a definition in place so that it's clear that it's not like a bazillion digital news intermediaries that we want to be involved in all these negotiations for the CRTC to be managing, that, having a threshold will narrow it down to the ones we really want.
Thank you, Ms. Gladue. Before I go to Mr. Biddle, though, I would like to let the committee know that if CPC 5 is adopted, CPC 6, CPC 7, CPC 8, and CPC 9 cannot be moved. All right, carry on. Chris?
Thank you so much, Madam Chair. I guess, very briefly, It's really disappointing to see the misinformation back on C11 with respect to user-generated content. It is not part of C11. I don't know why we're returning to this, but it needs to be stated, and it's ridiculous, and it continues to play out. That being said, I'll speak to CPC 5, but my comments will apply to 6, 7, 8, and 9. So I'll just say this once. I guess it's not surprising. It seems like this reasonable amendment. But this is creating a loophole big enough for Facebook to drive and Google to drive a truck through, which, again, is unsurprising given what the Conservatives have been doing throughout this entire process, which is to be the PR reps for big foreign tech companies. These companies have been very good internationally in exploiting loopholes and avoiding regulation. Adding specific revenue thresholds will prevent the bill from adapting to an evolving technological landscape and changing markets. The current approach in the Act provides the government with the most flexibility to evolve with the changes, and a flexible approach is better for the Online News Act, as we've seen foreign tech giants try to avoid, in other jurisdictions, try to avoid responsibility under those countries' legislation. Thresholds will create loopholes for platforms that they can exploit. As the numbers get lower, we're starting at 100 million. As the numbers get lower, we're scoping in so many organizations. This is about dealing with a specific imbalance. And we've heard from organizations, we've heard from small organizations in Alberta and Saskatchewan about this imbalance, about the loss of ad revenue from certain organizations. I don't know why the Conservatives want to scope in so many different organizations and so many other platforms. I thought they wanted to limit the scope of the bill, but if the lower we get, CPC 9, the number of and I hear concerns from the opposition about blogs and other items, the more we get down, the more likely you are to scope in that. And so if we want to ensure that C18 benefits news organizations, we can't create loopholes that will allow the tech giants to avoid the law, which is what they're going to try to do. And even these numbers that the Conservatives created, there's no basis for them. They pick numbers out of the air. And it's not contributing to this debate and is just serving the interests of some of the largest companies in the world, which once again, through C11 and C18, the Conservatives are lining up side by side with foreign tech giants. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Mr. Housefather. Anthony?
Thank you so much, Madam Chair. I just wanted to make 2 brief points. Number one, I agree with Mr. Biddle's comments about just getting around any revenue threshold number. For example, most, at least many advertisers that work with these platforms are also multinational companies. In a private deal, you can easily say, instead of paying me $25 million for your ads in Canada, pay me $1 million for your ads in Canada, add that $24 million to your US ads, and you'll pay the same amount of money. You'll have the same amount of ads in both Canada and the United States, but we've shifted around the numbers so that it's no longer revenue generated in Canada. And that is a simple solution that anybody could use to get around a provision that puts a revenue threshold by simply moving the monies exchanged to another jurisdiction and raising the price of ads in that jurisdiction and lowering them in Canada. And I'm just giving you one example of many, many contractual ways, as somebody who practiced in a multinational technology company, that companies can use to get around a revenue threshold. The second thing that I wanted to raise is I do find it to be really disappointing when highly intelligent people are claiming that something could exist that is so far from the truth and so much of a stretch of the imagination that user-generated content is somehow going to be part of this bill. The bill talks about, in order for there to have to be a trigger of negotiations, a significant bargaining power imbalance between an operator and news businesses. So let's take, for example, Post Media, large news business, outlets around the world, hundreds of millions of dollars, if not billions of dollars in revenue. And then you're going to have the criteria as follows: the size of the intermediary or the operator, whether the market for the intermediary gives the operator a strategic advantage over news businesses, and whether the intermediary occupies a prominent market position, and make the claim that somehow some individual blogger is going to be covered by having a strategic advantage over Post Media or any news business is so far from the truth and such an incredible stretch by any measure of the imagination that it can only amount to misinformation to make the claim that user-generated content is covered by this bill. And I hope I don't hear that argument again at this committee, because it is beneath all of our, intelligences to make that claim. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Housefather. Now, Clerk, is there anybody else on that floor who wants to speak?
Thank you, Dr. Fry. Yes, I have Mrs. Thomas, I have Mr. Julian, and I have Ms. Gladue.
Mrs. Thomas?
Thank you. Just a quick question for the officials here. With regards to 6A, and let me back up here for just 2 seconds. So there are 3 criteria that are laid out here, and various witnesses that came to the committee talked about the vague nature of these 3, and the fact that they are highly subjective to context. And so with regards to 6A, I'm wondering concerning the term size of the intermediary, because that will be one factor considered in terms of whether or not this legislation will apply to an entity. How will the size of the intermediary or the operator be measured? What size would be in and what size would be out? And size of what?
Thank you for the question, Chair, if I may.
Absolutely.
The subparagraph A is indeed intended to speak to something like a revenue threshold that could be either in relation to global revenues or Canadian earned revenues, the details of which would be worked out through a regulatory process where the Governor and Council would come forward with a proposed threshold. It would be published in Canada Gazette Part 1 for opportunity for folks to comment and provide feedback, and then finalized in Canada Gazette Part 2.
Thank you. Now, Mrs. Thomas, have you finished with your questions?
I did have a couple of follow-ups.
Go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you, by the way, Mr. Ripley. With regards to 6B, this is actually, sorry, just a quick clarification on 6A then. Who's going to determine that? That's going to be determined by the Governor and Council? Okay, thank you. And then with regards to 6B, the question there then is whether the market for the intermediary gives the operator a strategic advantage over news businesses. I'm curious about this phrase, strategic advantage. That's one term that I'd love some clarification on. What does that mean? And then the first term actually would be market. How would market be defined under this?
Thank you for the question, MP Thomas. So this would be something, section or subparagraph B is intended to speak to something like the advertising market in search or the advertising market in social media. And the question of a strategic advantage is whether in intermediary has a particular advantage given its business model. So one of the issues in this space is that these intermediaries often act as a distribution platform for news businesses, but at the same time they compete against those news businesses in the advertising market at the same time. So it's intended to speak to that kind of concept.
Thank you.
Strategic advantage. Could you, sorry, I know that you're touching on it within that definition, but what's that threshold to determine if it's a strategic advantage?
Right. So the idea behind B is to articulate the particular market in which the intermediary operates. Again, the example I would give you, acknowledging that the specifics will have to be worked out through regulatory processes, but would be, for example, the advertising market in both search and social media, and in the Canadian context, we know that there are two companies that accrue approximately 80% of the advertising market in the digital space. So it's that idea behind the notion of strategic advantage. Again, as I mentioned, there's particular dynamics at play in this space where some of these intermediaries offer both a distribution platform, but at the same time they're competing in for those advertising dollars against those who are distributing their content on their platforms.
Okay, and then with regard to point C. It states, it uses this phrase so it says whether the intermediary occupies a prominent market position. So this phrase, prominent market position, again, I'm not able to find a definition within the bill. And so I'm wondering if you can expand on that or help me understand what is meant by that phrase.
Thank you, MP Thomas. So subparagraph C would be something like, what we had in mind is number of Canadian users or something along those lines. And so the combination of A, B, and C, again, all under the chapeau, as being pointed out, that we're talking about where a significant bargaining power exists, but then you're looking at something like a revenue threshold. You're looking at the articulation of the particular markets in which you may have that strategic advantage, and then you're looking at something like a Canadian user threshold.
And in terms of like the number of Canadian users, that's for the sake of being accessed through marketing, like advertising?
It speaks so the. It speaks to there being a market presence here in the Canadian context, right? So otherwise, I mean, again, if hypothetically you're looking at, say, a global revenue threshold under A, you can have a strategic market advantage, but that could theoretically exist outside of being grounded in the Canadian context. So subparagraph C is about talking about a market presence here in Canada that would need to be met.
Okay. So essentially then, in order to be scoped in or out of this legislation, a definition will be, or criteria will be created around each of these points, A, B, and C. A having to do with a revenue threshold, B having to do with advertising market and dollars that are brought in there that might give a strategic advantage. And C has to do with audience, the number of Canadians that the platform would be able to reach.
Active users or active users, again, acknowledging, right, that the business model of digital intermediaries who may be subject to it could look different. Mm-hmm.
Okay. My last question for you, Mr. Ripley, is I've noted that Section 6, of course, as it appears here, is in addition to Section 2, where a DNI is defined. Why not just have one section? Why have Section 2 with part of the definition of a DNI and then Section 6 with further criteria that have to be met in order to be scoped in? Why, if you could just help me understand that mechanism, why two clauses instead of just making it one concrete, streamlined definition with regards to what a DNI is and whether or not it's scoped in or out?
Mm-hmm. Thank you for the question. So I would say that Section 6 is not actually about the definition of a DNI, right? So Section 2 sets out sets out the definition, as we discussed the other day. Section 6 is really a threshold question. So it recognizes that there will be entities that meet the definition of digital news intermediary that will not be subject to that bargaining obligation. So Section 6 is really about establishing those thresholds after which a platform is designated, or whatever the term is that you want to use, and subject to that bargaining framework. And so it sets out the process to arrive at those thresholds, which, as we've talked about, is through a governor and council regulatory process.
Thank you, Ms. Thomas. Mr. Julian.
Thanks very much, Madam Chair. I'm opposed to creating more loopholes. I mean, it doesn't make sense to me that we put into place legislation that community newspapers in places like Alberta and Saskatchewan have asked us to do to improve the bill. Doesn't mean creating more loopholes and creating more escape clauses for the web giants. And so I'll be voting against this amendment. But, Madam Chair, I note that the Conservatives have put forward 5 identical amendments. The only thing that has changed is the dollar figure. That, to me, is a real attempt to filibuster and stall the legislation. And I just come back to the witnesses that came before us. The Alberta Community Newspaper Association, the Saskatchewan Community Newspaper Association. These are newspapers that basically provide important journalism for communities and that represent nearly half of the Conservative caucus. And I don't understand how any member of Parliament, when the community newspapers come forward and say this legislation needs to be improved, but this legislation is needed, would then put forward amendments that are clearly designed just to stall the legislation from being adopted. It doesn't make sense to me. I think it's disrespectful to Alberta community newspapers and Saskatchewan community newspapers do such an important job in providing communities across Alberta and Saskatchewan with the kind of journalism that is so important to bring together a community. So I would hope that my Conservative colleagues would withdraw the other amendments that are basically just carbon copies with just one, the dollar figure changed. Rather than stalling the bill, we have important work to do to move forward on this bill, to improve it for sure. But, I mean, in this case, we have 5 amendments that are identical, where they've just changed the dollar figure, clearly an attempt to stall, clearly an attempt to block the legislation. That's not what Alberta community newspapers and Saskatchewan community newspapers want. I think we should abide by their testimony.
Thank you, Mr. Julian. Ms. Gladue.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, I want to clearly say that I am not trying to stall the bill, and I think it's unhelpful for Mr. Julian to malign the intentions of the Conservatives here. We're trying to improve the bill. We've expressed our concerns numerous times, and that's what we're trying to do. Now, case in point, Mr. Ripley has actually said that in order to apply Clause 6, they will have to do some kind of revenue level, and that will be done in regulations. So this concept is going to happen. It's just a question of, first of all, I don't like it when the government and council determines in regulations with no parliamentary oversight what the thing is. So I'd rather have it in the legislation. And I believe in Australia that they had the same thought pattern and did define something, and they've created a list of who those people are, which they've made public. So I think, this has merit, but I do respect what Mr. Housefather said. He always brings his law experience to the table, and so I see the point of making sure that it's not a loophole that people can crawl out of. So I wondered, I would be open to the concept of amending this amendment with a sub-amendment saying that the revenue was generated in Canada. So then people couldn't move it around the world, and whether that would be palatable to the members opposite. Thank you.
If you're moving that amendment, Ms. Gladue, where would you move it in that amendment? Where exactly?
I would put it right after that generates at least $100 million per year in advertising, subscription, usage, or membership revenue generated in Canada. if having a regard to so that it's clear that anything, like we're trying to set a target based on what they're doing, their activity here, and that we don't want any game playing of people moving money around the world in order to avoid, having to pay up. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, we have a sub-amendment, and as you see, it's pretty simple. After subscription usage or membership revenue generated in Canada, etc. Now, is there any discussion on that sub-amendment?
Mr. Biddle has his hand up, Dr. Fry.
Chris?
Oh, thank you, Madam Chair. I really just think it's ironic after protesting that they're not filibustering, they're filibustering their own amendment by adding something that really won't do anything and still allows this massive loophole to exist.
Thank you, Mr. Biddle. Now, I also wonder, once again, Mr. Coteau, that skeletal hand in front of your chin, is everyone seeing this or is it just me?
I think what you're seeing is when I go to touch my chin, you see it as a hand. It's just my regular hand.
No, I'm sorry. It's okay. All right. I'm just seeing this little skeletal hand. Anyway, Mr. Housefather.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair. I just want to, first of all, thank you to Ms. Gladue for saying that. I always appreciate working with her. I don't think the amendment that she proposes would change anything. Generated in Canada, again, if I'm going to, in a contract, say that I sell X amount of ads in Canada and I take, a small amount of money for that, and I put that money adding, into my U.S. revenues by saying that in the U.S. I'm charging you more for ads, knowing it's a global deal, we would never be able to know that or understand it. And adding the word generates there wouldn't change anything. I think the issue is, like, again, as Mr. Biddle kind of said, if you're going to use revenues, and I'm not 100% sure that that's the ideal way of measuring this. I understand Ms. Gladue's comments about accountability to Parliament and not just having, orders in council without parliamentary supervision come up with numbers. I'm not sure numbers is the effective way of measuring this at all. I don't know that Mr. Ripley said that they would have to go that route. I think it was an option. But I think you'd need to look at worldwide revenues as well as Canadian in order to make this ability to ascertain it and to avoid revenues being disguised by being put internationally. So I don't think anybody here right now has thought this through in a manner that would be comprehensive enough to look at how best to create that kind of revenue dynamics or threshold, that we can just as a spur of a moment throw out a number at the committee, because I just don't think any of us have done that analysis in depth to know what the right numbers would be and what the best way would be to avoid the ability to use subterfuge by the large multinationals to avoid getting caught by a bill. I just know the way it's being suggested here, I can see a lot of ways around that. So that was what my comments had been. But thank you to my friend Marilyn, again, always.
Thank you, Anthony. So now, if no one else has their hand up, I would like to call the question on the sub-amendment.
On the sub-amendment?
Anthony, can you put your hand down, please? Thanks. I've got this hand thing going on here with Michael. Anyway, I'm going to call. Can we call the question on the sub-amendment, which reads, "or membership revenue generated in Canada"? Any opposition to that sub-amendment? Do we want to call that question, Clerk? Yes, let's do it.
The submitted by Ms. Gladue on CPC 5. Mr. Biddle.
Opposed.
Mr. Coteau.
Opposed.
Ms. Hefner.
Also opposed.
Mr. Housefather.
Opposed.
Mr. Lewis.
Against.
Ms. Gladue.
For.
Mr. Shields.
For.
Mrs. Thomas.
Yes.
Mr. Waugh.
Yes.
Mr. Champoux.
Contre.
Mr. Julian.
Contre.
7 contre et 4 pour.
Q. The sub-amendment does not carry, and now I'm going to call the question on the original amendment, which is CPC 5. Please call the question. Please call it, Clerk.
Yes, Dr. Fry, thank you. So CPC 5, Mr. Biddle.
Opposed.
Mr. Coteau.
Opposed.
Ms. Hefner. Mr. Housefather.
Opposed.
Mr. Lewis.
Against.
Ms. Ladu.
In favor.
Mr. Shields.
In favor.
Mrs. Thomas.
In favor.
Mr. Waugh.
In favor.
Monsieur Champoux.
Je vote contre.
Monsieur Julian.
Contre.
7 nays, 4 yeas.
Therefore, CPC 5 does not carry. Now, because CPC 5 does not carry, we have, as Mr. Housefather so kindly reminded us, we now have CPC 6, which is the same motion with a different level, and then CPC 7 and CPC 8, all of which are the identical motion, but with different monetary levels, actually, and so is CPC 9. So I guess we're going to have to go through each one of those. Given that it's the same motion and that it's just a different...
Dr. Fry,
different
there's a point of order
thing.
on the floor from Mr. Julian.
Yes, Mr. Julian.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I mean, it's customary in a case like this for the party that put forward the amendments just to withdraw the other ones. We've had the debate, the substantive debate around the approach, the fact that they put in different figures. That's fine in terms of proposing the amendment originally, but now that we've had the discussion, I hope my colleagues would simply withdraw CPC 6, 7, 8, and 9, because otherwise it would be very clearly a filibuster.
Thank you, Mr. Julian.
Dr. Fry, Ms. Gladue has her hand up.
Marilyn?
Thank you, Chair. On the same point of order, absolutely, Mr. Julian, it's quite correct that, I mean, we just put different sort of dollar values in to look at different thresholds. So we agree to withdraw CPC 6, CPC 7, CPC 8, and CPC 9.
Thank you very much, Ms. Gladue. I just wanted to point out, I think we have until 7 minutes after the hour to go, if you wish to deal with that, and so we have therefore 9 and 7, 16 minutes left. Is there a substitute, clerk? Yes. So we have a substitute. Mario Simard is subbing for Mr. Champoux
Except that
for the rest of the meeting.
The Dr. Fry, sorry, the substitution has not yet taken effect because Mr. Champoux is still in the room. So we are
still in the room. All right.
Graced with the presence of 2 block members.
Thank you. Okay. So now we've got a kind of removal of these.
It's called the wall.
It's called the wall. We've got a removal of those. So that the next thing we're moving to now is 7, 8, 9. Shall clause 6 carry?
There are different voices in the room, Dr. Fry.
All right, please call it.
On clause 6, Mr. Biddle.
In favor.
Monsieur Coteau.
In favor.
Ms. Hefner.
Oui.
I can't hear you, clerk. You're on mute, but I think you're calling me and I'm in favor.
Sorry, there was just a question in the room, Mr. Housefather. I apologize.
No problem. In favor.
Are we okay? We're okay? Mr. Housefather, I apologize, sir.
In favor.
Mr. Lewis. Ms. Gladue.
Opposed.
Mr. Shields.
Opposed.
Mrs. Thomas.
Opposed.
Mr. Waugh.
Opposed.
Monsieur Champoux.
Pour.
Mr. Julian.
Pour.
7 yeas, 4 nays.
All right, so clause 6 is carried. Now we're going to move on to clause 6.1, which would be CPC 10.
Point of order.
Yes, Mr.
It's me, Anthony.
Yeah, Anthony, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. In my view, Madam Chair, a CPC 10 would now not be in order, given that Section 4 refers to an amount provided for in Section 6, and there's no amount now provided for in Section 6. So this was dependent on one of the previous CPC amendments actually carrying, and not having carried. In my view, Madam Chair, this is out of order.
Shall we ask Mr. Miller to comment?
Sure, Madam Chair.
Mr. Miller?
Thank you, Madam Chair. It's a good remark from Mr. Housefather. Indeed, Clause 6 was not adopted, so maybe a sub-amendment could be brought forward to... oh, sorry. The amount. Right. Yeah, the amount. Yeah. So maybe a sub-amendment would be brought forward to rectify the situation, if that's at all possible.
Madam Chair, I'm so sorry.
Yes, Anthony?
I'm so sorry, Madam Chair, to elaborate, but this entire section, as you read it, right, it's a review regarding the amount provided for in the section. So the whole substance of this amendment relates to a review of a number that doesn't exist, a report to be tabled about a number that doesn't exist, and then regulations related to a number that doesn't exist. Mr. Mella, I mean, with due respect, I believe this is this should be not receivable based on the rejection of the previous amendments, as it's completely corollary to one of them being approved.
Order. Someone else is speaking on the floor, please. Mr. Housefather does have the floor. Thank you. Anthony.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm done. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. So,
Madam Chair, if I may.
Yes, Mr. Mella.
I would agree with Mr. Housefather.
Thank you. So that we shall not ask the question on CPC 10. It is negated, and we now go to clause 7. Okay, CPC 11. Mr. Nader was moving CPC 11. Is there someone from the Conservatives who wish to move it?
Ms. Gladue has
Speak
her hand
to
up,
it.
Dr. Fry.
Marilyn?
Yes, Chair. So basically this amends the language that's in the bill that says basically provides the Commission with the information it requires for the purpose of verifying compliance, which could be very broad. I mean, they could ask for anything. So it says reasonably requires. So I think it's just trying to, focus in that if the Commission needs information to verify compliance, it needs to be reasonable. It has to be related to the matter. Thank you.
Dr.
Any
Fry?
further discussion?
Mr.
Yes.
Biddle has his hand up.
Chris?
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And I don't think it really changes the bar concept of reasonableness from requires to reasonably required. I think it's redundant and unnecessary. Just very quickly to Mr. Ripley, if you can explain how this would work in practice.
Thank you.
Mr. Ripley?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the question. So the intention here is that the CRTC have the ability to request information it needs for the purposes of administering the Act. And so, it is bounded by that. The idea is not that the CRTC should be able to request any kind of information it wants. Reasonably further specifies that degree of connection or nexus between that from my perspective.
Thank you. Mr. Biddle? Did you get the answer you wanted?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Dr.
Anthony?
Fry? Dr. Fry, I had Mrs. Thomas and then Mr. Housefather.
Thank you. Mrs. Thomas?
Thank you. My question to the officials is this clause has to do with duty to notify. And so the operator has to notify the commission, the CRTC, if it falls within this subjective and very vague definition that has been outlined in Clause 6. And so I guess I'm just curious then, if DNIs are expected to self-declare under this legislation, if they fail to do so, what happens?
Thank you for the question, MP Thomas and Chair, if I may. The mechanism that is provided for is that digital news intermediaries are best placed to assess whether they meet the threshold set out in Section 6, and so it is incumbent on them to come forward. The alternate would be to empower and require the CRTC to survey everybody that they think could potentially be subject, and then ask for information, which is a much heavier process. The information gathering powers, though, are there to ensure compliance at the end of the day. So if the CRTC suspects that a digital news intermediary may be subject and they haven't come forward, they have the tools to verify compliance. I expect the first step in terms of what that would look like would be, indicating, once they've had an opportunity to review that information, and if they were of the opinion that they you do meet the thresholds at Section 6, that the first step would be for the CRTC to indicate to the digital news intermediary that they are subject to the legislation and would be expected to comply. Failure to comply at that point could result in the imposition of administrative monetary penalties.
Mr. Ripley, thank you. Just to be clear, though, you're saying that it's likely that the Commission would notify these entities that they fall within this scope, but it's not an essential requirement within this legislation. It's not stated in this legislation that DNIs will be notified that they are in fact scoped in. It states that the CRTC will be responsible for creating a list, but my understanding of this legislation is that that list will be based on self-declarations. Am I missing something?
No, that is correct. Again, the mechanism provided for is that the expectation is that digital news intermediaries identify themselves when they meet those thresholds, and again, they are best placed to assess whether they meet the threshold, and that they are to come forward and indicate to the CRTC, at which point they would be added to the list that you referred to. But again, the CRTC is being provided with information gathering tools so that they can ensure compliance if need be.
So again, then, just coming back to my question, because I don't know that it was answered, my question was, what would happen to an entity then that didn't declare as a DNI? What would those repercussions look like?
So the CRTC would have a variety of tools at its disposal. At the end of the day, failure to comply with the Act could result in the imposition of administrative monetary penalty, but the goal at the end of the day is to ensure compliance with the Act. And from my perspective, the first step would be discussions with the digital news intermediary to make sure that they understood that they based on the information they've provided are subject to the Act and would be expected to comply. And failing to do so after that point, could result in the imposition of administrative monetary penalties.
Thank you.
Mr. Housefather?
Thanks, Madam Chair. My question was already answered, so don't need the floor.
Thank you. So now, if there's no further...
I had Ms. Ladu and...
Yes, Marilyn?
Yeah, just one more thing I want to say about this. I don't know what Mr. Nader was thinking when he put it forward, but what I was thinking was the problem I had is that this section says that the Commission, that these individuals or entities have to provide the Commission with any information the Commission requires for the purpose of verifying. So we've all seen overburdensome requests from government. If you haven't experienced them, it's not great. And we've got these small entities. We don't want to be overburdensome. So the amendment that's been made takes out the word any and puts in the reasonably constraint. And I think that would improve the bill. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Gladue. Any further discussion? Shall I call the question?
Dr. Fry,
Yes.
Mr. Waugh had his hand up as well.
Oh, I'm sorry, Kevin.
No, just very quickly, Madam Chair. Mr. Ripley, I don't recall the CRTC leveling too many fines over the years. You would probably agree with me. So this is loosely interpreted. I don't, not that I don't trust the CRTC. I have several questions surrounding them, but I do have an issue with, this is loosely written, if you don't mind me saying. The CRTC is the regulator, but at the same time, we never hear of massive fines going out to anybody. So I do have an issue with certain regulation here, just to put it on record. Okay.
Thank you, Kevin. So now I'm going to call the question on CPC 11. Shall CPC 11 carry? Is there disagreement on the floor? Shall we call the vote? Clerk?
What did you say? There's a discrepancy of opinion.
All right. Yes, so call the vote, please.
My apologies. Thank you. Mr. Biddle.
Opposed.
Mr. Coteau.
Opposed.
Ms. Hefner.
Opposed.
Mr. Housefather.
Contre.
Mr. Lewis.
Against.
Ms. Gladue.
In favor.
Mr. Shields.
In favor?
Mrs. Thomas.
In the name of transparency and accountability, I support.
Mr. Waugh.
In favor.
Mr. Simard.
Contre.
Mr. Julian.
Contre.
7 nays, 4 yeas.
So CPC 11 does not carry. And we're now going to move to CPC 12. And I think we may be coming to the end of our rope here. Yes, we have 1 more minute to go. Do you think that we can vote on CPC 12 in that 1 minute? No. So then I think we should adjourn this meeting. The meeting is now adjourned. Thank you.